Hello, everybody. My name is Kurt Kilgrave, and this is the Kilgrave Corner. First things first, this is where horror writers talk horror. And the first thing I'm going to do is, before I even introduce you to my guest, I want to give you a little bit of background as to why I wanted to have him on the show. In my senior year of high school, I read a book by Stephen King called Salem's Lot. And there was a scene in there that scared the living hell out of me, and it stuck with me ever since. And although, through the years, I've written a bunch of novels and historical thrillers and romantic comedies under a different pen name, you can find that on my website. I'd actually started wanting to write horror a few years ago. And the first book I read and I bought from my Kindle was something called The Demonic by Lee Mountford. And he is my guest today. Lee, thank you so much for stopping in.
Hello, thank you for having me on. It's great to be here.
Great. So yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was because there were really two scenes in this book that really did scare me, and it has been, years since that had happened, and
Wow.
it's just like that scene in Salem's Lot where,
Yeah.
I had this, and I'm like, oh my God, and I still think about it. Probably, it don't freak out about it, but probably like 10, 12 times a year,
Wow. Oh,
because
that's
I'm like,
fantastic.
yeah, because I'm just like, what, how did he do that? And I would go
Wow.
back and read it, and it's like it's sort of a build up. And I
Yeah.
for your readers, those of them who've, gotten into the haunting or the haunted series,
Yeah.
some of them I'm sure has gone back and read the demonic, but
Yes.
it
Yeah.
really was this book that hooked me.
Yeah.
And the book cover is awesome. I love it.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
tell us a little bit about, what inspired you to write this story.
This story, no, absolutely. I mean, The Demonic was the second book I ever wrote, but it has been the one that's sort of taken hold most. I think that is probably the book I'm best known for. And the inspiration from it actually came from my hometown in the northeast of England. The hometown's called Ferry Hill, which I changed for the book. It's Bishop's Hill in the book. But there was in the 1800s there was a murder that took place in a farm in Ferry Hill, where a farmhand killed three children who were staying there while the parents were away, which is one of the backstories in the book to one of the ghost characters. So I always heard that story growing up, and there was the mill part of the farm that was still standing to this day, and we all, as children, thought it's haunted, and there were stories of running around it anti-clockwise 13 times on Halloween, and the ghost will come back and get hold of you and things like that. And I think that is a lot of what the demonic is. It's going back to that time as a kid when you told ghost stories, and I try to keep the scares to sort of that level, so it sort of resonated a little bit than anything too big or bombastic. And that's kind of how I tried to build the scares in that book. It was just to keep that in mind, keep them a slow, steady build, have the reveal, and then keep all the sort of the full-on action, for want of a better word, to the end of the book when things are really ramped up, just to sort of keep it at that level, which I think seeps in a little bit more and unnerves you. Certainly unnerves me, and that was one of the key things that I wanted to keep too.
Wow. Yeah. It's interesting because sometimes when you're writing horror, there could be a scene or even just a sentence where something comes. And that was
Mm-hmm.
one that got me. It's like everything's fine, you know, woman walks into the bathroom and went, oh, but holy shit, I mean, all of a sudden, just one sentence, it's like, ooh, he didn't
Yeah.
even, it's one of those jump scares.
Yeah, do you know, I did actually, I've never seen this before. I had a review where the lady who was leaving the review said it actually made one scene, and it's a scene you're referring to, actually made me jump. And I was like, I never expected that from a book. And I was like, wow, that's something. I was really pleased with that. I didn't deliberately try and make somebody jump, but the fact that it had that effect, I was really pleased with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at least when I read horror, and this happened a couple nights ago, or I'm just reading, and it's the same sort of thing. And I'm just like, that is awesome. And it's like you sort of get excited and you get your
Yeah.
heart going. And I mean, I'm not sure about, readers. I would imagine it's the same for us, but it'd probably
Yeah.
be a little bit more difficult for us because we actually write these things.
Yeah.
I know you outline, I outline, so we
Yes.
know what's coming when it comes.
Exactly. Yeah.
But these guys, which is so awesome, it's so fun to get that type of response.
That's it, exactly right. And what I've started doing now more so is I'll know roughly when a scare's coming in the story. I have the outline, and my outlines have got a lot more loose as the years have gone on. But now I know I get a feel of, right, I know I need some kind of scare to happen here, but in the outline, it's kind of left open, so I can sort of play with that as I am writing it, and that's come on as my writing has progressed. So when I was writing the demonic, I had an idea of what the scenes were, but now I know when the scene needs to be, roughly where it might be located, and then I just let my imagination go and see what I can come up with. But at the time, it was a bit more plotted out, certainly with the demonic, and maybe I should go back to that because it's obviously worked well.
So there was as I go through and before I interview people on the show, I go over and read their interviews,
Yes.
whether if it's blog posts, whether if it's, podcasts and that sort of
Mhm.
thing. Um, you'd mentioned something about plotting where you actually
Mhm.
outline it, and there are instances where you're not tethered to the outline.
Yeah.
And that's sort of something that I deal with every time I outline, and then I look at it and go, based on everything that's come before, this isn't good enough. And I
Yeah.
just crossed, I think the last one I
Yeah.
crossed out like 3 chapters straight. Is that
Yeah.
something that you do?
It has happened before, yeah. Then with the haunted series, I had the 3 books sort of all outlined because I thought I need this endpoint, I need them all to interlink, I need that outline. But then when I sat down to start writing, things did change. But then what the outline did serve was, if I knew this changed, I did know the knock-on effect, so I could go forward a little bit and think, right, I need to tweak this. So I've certainly had instances where I've been writing and the outline is just, completely gone out of the window. But what I do think it helps with is it instills the story into my head. So I've got that outline. I know roughly what the story is. If things change, I know the sort of the framework that I need to keep within, just to keep the story on track and keep it true to its sort of themes and that kind of thing. So I absolutely have had that, but I still feel an outline is really worthwhile just because it gives you that grounding. It's kind of like a basic first draft. I know a lot of writers will write a first draft completely seat of the pants, and then they'll have to go back and start over to a certain extent and fix a lot, where I think the outline does a lot of that heavy lifting without the amount of work needed to put into to come up with it, where you'd have some first drafts which are quite intensive.
I think of it as I'm a big fan of the Twilight Zone. So it's like there's a signpost up ahead. The
Yeah,
next stop, the Twilight Zone. It's sort of like
yeah,
every chapter, there's a signpost up ahead that we're kind of
yeah.
using when we outline.
Exactly, and I think it gives you a good grounding in story and how story works and what the beats need to be and when things need to come in and start ramping up and slowing down. I think an outline helps with that, where if I'd have just sort of, and I did suffer from this a lot of, I've been writing for, all my life that I can remember, but finishing a story, was the hardest thing in the world for me. And they'd always get lost. They'd wander down a rabbit hole and I couldn't figure out how to get things back on track. And it was because I didn't really understand how story works from a writer's point of view. Whereas the outline, it sort of means you do that a few times, it just gets that inside of you and it becomes second nature to an extent. So I think that's why they really work. And I know a lot of people say, I want to be a writer. I've never finished a story, but I don't want to outline it. It feels like it's too restrictive. And I just think, well, try it. What you're doing isn't working. Try this. And it doesn't always have to be the same all the way through your career. Things change, but just to get you going, I think it's worthwhile. Certainly.
Definitely. Yeah, at least for me. Like you said,
Yeah.
some people it works for, others no.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
you'd mentioned something for the demonic, and that it was, I think it even said in the beginning, and I could be wrong, that it was based on actual events, or at least
Yeah.
so, and I think if I remember right, you've also had that in at least one more book, but it sounds like you really try to find out, that some of these other actual events had happened and then just take it into your own
Yeah.
story. Is that kind of what you try to do each time out?
Not every time, but sometimes certainly. Yeah, the demonic was the hometown sort of ghost story that we had with the murders at the farm that played into the history of the book. With other books, there's I've used sort of real life things that have supposedly got a bit of mythology about them, like in the Mark, there was I keep getting this the wrong way around, the Codex Gigas, which is the Devil's Bible, which is a real book. It exists. It's in a museum. There's 13 missing pages. Nobody knows what they are. So I took those 13 missing pages, and I've also used that element again in the Haunted. Just real world elements laced in a little bit. I don't do it every time, but I've certainly done it maybe 2 or 3 so far, because I just think it adds a little bit. With my latest, I'm currently writing books 5 and 6 for the Haunted series. And book 5 is set in it's another haunted house, but it's more of a modern haunted house. It could be the everyday thing, and I wanted the idea to go back into this house that had a history, that was maybe, was it real, what happened in the past, was it not? and I thought maybe I could set it in the UK. We have this. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's called the Enfield Haunting, and it's kind of like
Yes.
our Amityville. And I thought, I wonder if I could set a book in the Enfield house, going back years later. In the end, I decided that might be a bit of a tricky thing to do. So I've created a new house that's sort of loosely based on it. So certainly the book I'm writing now has links to real world events, even though I've changed certain things just to fit the story.
Now, the one that you mentioned, the Enfield Haunting, wasn't that
Yeah.
The Conjuring 2? Or
Yes,
no?
that's right.
Okay,
Correct.
all
Yeah.
right,
That was the Conjuring
good.
too. Yeah.
Because we'll have to talk about that because I love that series.
Yes,
Um,
me too.
One thing I wanted to mention, as I said, I try to go back and look at past interviews and
Mhm.
previous podcasts. One thing I'm going to do is something that I saw the other day and noticed that I'm not sure anybody else has noticed. Something that about you, actually. So here we are. I'm going to share my image here of you. And it says down
Oh,
here, who is Lee Mountford, right?
yeah.
Lee is a horror author from the northeast of England. His book Horror in the Woods, and it goes on and on.
Yeah.
But one thing people, I'm not sure if they've realized, is something up here with these eyes. They are red.
I had not noticed that.
And in one of my books, I have a demon. I'm not going to tell you which one that has red eyes. So if this
Yeah.
demon has red eyes and Lee Mountford has red eyes, therefore Lee Mountford must be a demon.
Right, the secret's out now. Oh no, that's the real reason I write these books. Yeah, you've got me.
Exactly. I thought there was some type of I don't know, not voodoo, but something going
Yeah,
through your head, some circuits or something like that.
I summon some help from another realm when I'm writing. Yeah, that's what it is.
So I'd like to find out a little bit more about, your history with horror. What was it
Yeah,
that first triggered that interest and then led into actually writing these books?
yeah, certainly. I mean, again, for as long as I can remember it, ghost stories, things like that, always drew my attention. I remember being in primary school in the UK. That's our version of elementary school. Um, when we had free time, you could go to the library, get books, and there was a book there. It was real ghost stories, and it had pictures of supposed real ghosts. That was always the one that I'd pick up and read through. So I always had that draw. But I always remember in 1992, where I will have been about 11, there was a TV program on in the UK called Ghost Watch.
Hmm.
And it was kind of hinted at in the build-up that it was supposed to be a documentary, a live investigation into a haunted house. Nobody was expecting anything to happen. It had real-world presenters in who people knew in the people in the UK knew. So I sat down to watch it, and I was my grandmother's at the time. She was babysitting, and we watched the program. What I didn't realize, it wasn't a live investigation. It was a fictional program set up to look like a live investigation.
Huh.
And then things did happen, and you could see the ghost in the background, or just hiding behind the curtain and things like that. And you pointed at the TV, it totally hooked me in, and it terrified me. But at the same time, I loved it, and it caused an uproar in the UK. There was a big thing. A lot of people were taken in, and I think because they were taken in, a lot of people were angry about that they'd been duped. Whereas I loved it. I thought, oh, that was fantastic. I want to do that kind of thing. I'd always loved reading, always loved writing my own stories. That kicked me on to really try my hand at writing from an early age. It was that program that I recommend people, check out if they can find it. It's aged a little bit. It was 92 when it was done, but it has a great feeling of dread that builds up through the whole thing, and you just catch these fleeting glimpses of the ghost. Did I see it? Did I not? Which I think a lot of horror is replicating now. You see that quite a bit. But that was sort of Ghostwatch was my Exorcist. I know a lot of people, it's the Exorcist that turns them onto horror. That was sort of my Exorcist. Certainly, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, mine would actually be something I remembered in my last episode. I was speaking with Boris Basic, and he was telling me a little bit about his history. And I told everyone that's listening to the show about watching The Body Snatchers in the movie theater. And
Mhm.
that one scared the heck out of me. But it was really when my mother took me to see Poltergeist,
Yes.
and I was 9 years old,
Yeah.
and that darn clown under the bed just did me in. But what actually made the story even scarier was when we were leaving. We
Yeah.
go into the parking lot, we go into this big van that we had. It's just me and my mom in the front two seats, and there's nobody in the back. And there's like
Yeah.
this huge long area. And we're driving down this two lane road with no lights on either side of us. It's just the headlights. And I'm just sitting there and it's really quiet. And she just turns to me and says, did you hear that? I'm like, what? What do you mean? And she's like, I thought I heard something. And then she'd play with it until she's like, oh my God, Steven, did you hear that? Kirk, did you hear that? I can't believe it. And I look back and I'm like, no one's there, no one's there. And then she starts laughing at me. And I just that just made the movie more horrifying, more terrifying for me. So
Absolutely, yeah.
I couldn't handle it. And that's after that. I mean, I've seen that movie probably 14 times or something like that. It's just insane. I watched it again
Well,
just a few months ago. It just is just great. But
now I'm
um,
going to have to say something here where I might have to hand in my horror card. I've never seen Poltergeist. I know I should have. I know it's just not a movie I've gotten around to watch yet. I need to change that.
yeah, don't watch the new one, the
No,
remake.
no, no,
Yeah.
no.
Spielberg produced the first one, and it's not going to be as good as today's horror because,
Mhm.
as time goes on, they just, we as creators, we just learn
Yeah,
more and
yeah.
put more into it. But that's something that, has always stuck with me that really gave me the bug to
Mhm.
really
Yeah.
go into horror. Now, one of the things I've always been curious about is, your book, Horror in the Woods.
Mhm.
You have that in a set, a collection that's like
Yeah.
the extreme horror
Mhm.
collection. Now, I know there's many different subgenres of horror. What
Mhm.
can you tell us about extreme horror?
Yeah. Now it's a tricky one, this one, because when I have three books starting with Horror in the Woods, and they're standalone stories, but they have nods to each other, exist in the same universe. Um, and Horror in the Woods, Tormented, and the Netherwell Horror have a lot more gore, a lot more visceral. Um, so I was thinking I wanted to put them together in a sort of a collection. I thought, well, they're quite extreme in terms of the violence in them, certainly. But I do think, are they really extreme? Because I know a lot of extreme horror can play with things like, really, really push the boundaries on what they deal with beyond just violence. It could be, sexual violence or things like that, or things happening to children or animals that really go out to sort of turn a reader's stomach. And, there's room for everything in horror and writing. Whereas these three books, I don't think do that. It just relies heavily on the sort of the visceral action in the book, and people getting dismembered and that kind of thing. So I do wonder, are these three extreme really? And I suppose on the one hand you could, yep, they're plenty gory, so you could absolutely say that. But I think there is an element of some extreme horror that really pushes the envelope in other ways, which those three books don't. So it was something I thought long and hard about, and I thought, well, I think extreme could count as violence, just violence as well. I think that is perfectly acceptable in that case. But yeah, some extreme horror is probably stuff that I couldn't write, I would say. Not to say there's anything wrong with it. I think there's room for everything in the genre. But certainly, I don't know what your take would be on extreme horror, how you would label it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think, and when I first thought of that term, my
Mhm.
first thought was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I haven't seen the original, The Last House on the Left. I've seen the
No,
remake
yeah.
a couple times, and that's also really difficult, to watch
Mm.
some scenes. But you're right. I would say sexual abuse,
Mhm.
violence, and then just like you mentioned, gore.
Yeah,
It's not like Evil Dead 2 gore where it's fun and just it's all
yeah,
jokes and games, but
exactly.
some real, I mean, I just saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre a few years ago, and
Yeah,
that movie just freaked me out. I was like,
yeah,
this looks so freaking real that,
yeah,
this could happen to anybody. And
yeah, absolutely.
and yeah,
It,
that was one thing I wanted to get in touch with you about because,
yeah.
I don't write it. I don't
Mhm.
really watch it or read
Yeah,
it really too much. Again, like you, I have no problem with it.
yeah, absolutely.
If I think anything's good, in the
Yeah,
genre as long as people are interested in reading it,
yeah.
and
I
that
think
sort of thing.
I think that's one of the great things about the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is that if I've seen it quite a few times, and there's very little in the way of gore. If you actually think about what you see, there's
Yeah,
not a lot, but it stays with you. It sort of leaves a lot to the imagination. So I suppose it's maybe not visceral, but it certainly makes you think that way. And the ending when the girl's trapped in the house, and there's the father or the grandfather who's practically decomposed, trying to hit it with a hammer, and she's the screaming that she's bellowing out. It is terrifying, that film. So I think that sort of paved the way from a lot of extreme, in that it maybe didn't show it, but it certainly implied it to the extent where it was certainly in your head.
yeah, yeah. There's You're right. Now that I'm thinking back to it, I'm also thinking of the end where the main character, the Chainsaw Massacre dude, starts
Yeah,
running around with a chainsaw, and
yeah.
that's not a normal image.
No,
So that just
absolutely, yeah,
leads you to believe that this guy is just totally crazy and willing to
yeah,
cut anybody and
yeah.
anyone who's in his way. So
That's it,
yeah,
and it's
and
in the
that
middle of daytime as well. It's
yeah,
middle of day. He's swinging this chainsaw around. It's not night. It's just yeah. He doesn't care. Absolutely.
just a regular guy.
Yeah. With somebody else's face on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So when I was again doing research on you, I noticed that you like Stephen King.
Mhm.
And a lot of horror writers like Stephen King. I'd
Mhm.
probably say, and I can't be certain, I don't have statistics on this, but
Yeah.
probably 60%
Mhm.
of horror writers like some of Stephen King's work. So I thought what I'm going to do because of that is introduce a segment on the show called the Stephen King Smackdown. And in this instance, what I'd like to do is something that a lot of people who don't like King have mentioned and said,
Mhm.
his books are just too darn long. And for me, I know when I saw that The Stand was a book, it was like 880 pages. And I was looking into it. Do I really want to read this huge long book? I've
Mhm.
read a number of books before that one, but I thought, well, I'll look a little bit more into it. And then I found
Mhm.
out that King came out with an uncut version that was like 1,200 and something pages, and that's the one I decided to read.
Wow.
So I wanted to have his full,
Yes.
vision of what he
Yeah.
created. So what I'm curious about with you is, what do you think? What's your take on it? Do you think his books are too long, too
Um,
short, just right?
I think it depends on the book, personally. I haven't read all of his work. I certainly haven't read The Stand. I was actually a bit put off by the length. It seemed like a big undertaking when that was out when I was young to sort of sit and get through. And I think one of the reasons King is popular, certainly this way in the UK, I don't know about in the States, is that if you're going into a bookshop to look for horror, there's very few names that you can pick from, and Stephen King is obviously one that's always on the shelf. So I think by virtue of that, and he became so big and is obviously extremely talented, far more than I ever will be. He will be a mainstay and a staple with a lot of people with regards to their favorite authors. But I did read it, and while I really did enjoy the book, I did find a lot of segments I was just skipping through, scanning the pages to make sure there was nothing major happening that I was missing. But I was skipping through a lot of sort of exposition and description and things like that. So far be it for me to criticize Stephen King, he's a legend, but I think it could lose a few hundred pages and be no worse for it, potentially. But then you have books like, and I always get the title wrong,
Oh,
1126. Yeah.
2363.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that I read that. I know it's not horror, but I thought that I zipped through that. I thought that was a perfect length.
Huh.
So I think it does depend on the book. As to I think some can be a little bit heavy for what they need to be. And I have read Stephen King's On Writing,
Right.
his book on writing, and he always says, cut what you don't need, cut what you don't need. And you think, well, yeah, did you? But yeah, I would say it definitely certainly depends on the book, from what I've seen anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. I also read it, and I did the same thing.
Yeah.
Specifically in the beginning, I was like, I
Mhm.
get the idea, and just skip and skip. And the strangest thing about that was that at page 423, and I have these markers in my head that I just
Oh, wow.
remember these because I thought about it so much. And at page 423, I was like, this book is finally, it's not just really good, it's superb.
Yes.
I know these characters so
Yeah.
well, they could be in my room right now
Yeah.
talking to me. And
Yeah.
I really think that is something that he brings out with these extra
Absolutely.
words that he
Yeah.
does. Because there's some, like you said, there, in my opinion, I would have cut a good bit of that
Yeah.
first 423
Yeah.
pages. But going back, knowing what I know now, how I felt about reading that and knowing
Yeah.
these characters. Would I go back and cut a lot? Maybe not. I don't
Yeah.
know.
No, I think
But
that's a good
yeah,
point, because when I did finish the book, I did think I miss these characters now. You felt a little bit deflated when the end came, and you were a bit sad to leave them. I think the bits that I think he could have focused on, like, is a lot of the descriptions of certain things. I know when things were happening, and I can't remember exactly when it was, and he was talking about some of the destruction that's going on in the town. That was very lengthy scenes for what it needed to get over. I think well, again, I can't say I can't criticize Stephen King, but I think those instances could have maybe been hemmed back a little bit and kept the character work in there, because I can't think of a writer who does character work as good as Stephen King. You know, you do fall in love
Exactly.
with the character. It seems effortless when you're
Yeah.
reading about these characters. You're in their heads. You feel like you know them. Superb at how he does that.
And I think that's what's special about him,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
it's all in the characters. So
Yeah.
like you said at the end, you felt a little deflated. I felt kind of betrayed at the end of that book, and I was really glad. I mean, I thought it was just an A+ book, and then at the
Mhm.
end I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe he did that. But
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
but for the movies now I
Yeah.
loved the movies. I thought
Yeah.
they were fantastic. What did you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I enjoyed them. I like the old 90s TV. It was made for TV, I think, with Tim Curry. I
Yeah,
absolutely adored that, and I was, really excited. I mean, I adored it. The ending was weak, even for the 90s of the series. But going in, I was thinking, I wonder how they're going to do Pennywise, and it's going to be a difficult task. But I think the actor Bill Skarsgård, I forget his
right.
name.
Hmm.
Yeah, fantastic. Went a completely different way. Totally right choice. He was creepy, almost unhinged.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed him. I preferred the first chapter to the second chapter, which I think played a bit more on the comedy. But yeah, both I really enjoyed. I thought it was a good decision to split into two movies as well, considering the amount that is in the book. Without it allowed them to tell the bulk of the story. Things had to be cut, but still give it room to to breathe and not be too cut down to what it could have been if it was just one. So
yeah.
yeah, I enjoyed them.
Yeah, totally, exactly. So I know, like again, I know you've tried to refer to your books like the Haunted series, like
Mhm.
it's like the Conjuring meets, I forget what it was, but I knew from there that you liked the Conjuring,
The
which was
Conjuring,
like,
yeah,
yes, because I
yeah,
love the Conjuring films.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Do you happen to like the universe that they've kind of created?
I like the idea of the universe. Certainly, I think some of the extended films have varied for me in quality. I think I haven't seen the most recent one, The Devil Made Me Do It. I've not seen that one yet. But the first two Conjuring films, I know some people don't like them. Totally get that. I love them. Absolutely love them. And I think Annabelle Comes Home and the Annabelle Homecoming. Is it Homecoming? There was
Um,
the two second Annabelle
right.
films I really enjoyed. The first one was okay. There was that scene where the mother was in the basement. She was trying to use the elevator and she was running up the stairs. I thought that was fantastic. Um, I did not enjoy The Nun. I really struggled with The Nun. Felt it was more dark fantasy than horror, and suffered for it. And there was another one in the extended universe. Is it?
Curse of La Llorona?
Yes, I thought that was okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I certainly, and I think it is. I like the idea of these expanded universes. I know in my stories, a lot of books reference each other to give an idea that this is, it's a bigger world, and so I do like that. Um, and I think it was people can get sick of this another Conjuring universe movie, and that's fine. I know they varied in quality, but for people that like them, why not give them that if they're successful? What's your take on it? Do you think they've overdone it, or
Yeah, I pretty much love all of them. Well, I can't
yeah,
say that now that I'm thinking of it. I love the first two Conjurings. I think those
yeah,
are just classic films. The
absolutely,
third one I did see, The Devil Made Me Do It,
Mhm.
and I thought there could have probably been about 20 to 30 minutes, probably about 20 minutes that they could have just cut from the film and it would have been
Mm.
way better.
Okay,
But yeah, the final two, or at least the last two Annabelles, were really good. The
Yeah,
the first one I was not really a fan of.
yeah.
The Nun I actually enjoyed. I thought there
Oh
were a
well,
lot of good
cool.
jump scares in that one. There
Yeah,
was some humor in the beginning.
yeah,
There wasn't as much character work,
yes, yeah,
so I can see where you're going with the
Mhm.
fantasy aspect of it. It just seemed like it just did really seem more like, all this stuff just coming out. It's not
Mhm.
really based in like real demonic,
Yes,
possessions and stuff
that's
like
it.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
And I've done a lot of research, and I'm sure you have too, on,
Mhm.
possessions and
Yeah,
how to go about, getting these demons outside of doing the right,
yeah,
basically.
that's it. Yeah,
And there wasn't really in there.
yeah,
But yeah, other than that, Insidious was great. I loved the
yes,
Paranormal Activities, the
yeah,
first two at least.
absolutely. Yeah, I
So
agree with that. Yeah, I
yeah.
did. I rewatched the first Paranormal Activity last year on Halloween.
Oh wow.
I was, sat watching the TV. It was nice. My wife was reading. My wife's not a fan of horror, so she had her earphones in. She was reading, and it was getting late, and I was sat watching it, and she sort of took her earphones on. She said, "I'm going up to bed now. I'll leave you to watch this." And I thought, No, it's freaked me out. I'll pause this off another day. It does still get under my skin, the Paranormal Activity, the first one especially. I think it is. The thing is, I know when you get a lot of sequels, that things seem to get, is it any good? People judge it on the original, on the sequels and so forth. But I think the first one's still so effective. Absolutely is, especially if you watch it at night, how you're supposed to, and the
Yes.
sound up. I think it's a brilliant film. And the Blair Witch, I'm a huge fan of that. For it
Hmm.
does similar things, a few years before what it doesn't show you, and it builds nicely. Things like that. Yeah, I really read the Paranormal Activity, certainly the first film.
The Blair Witch Project, that was one where I watched the film and I didn't really get it. I saw that
Yeah.
when it came out and I thought this movie sucks. Until my sister told me, she's like, "What are you talking about? Did you see the end?" I was like, "Yeah, what's the big deal?" She
Yeah.
told me about it and
Yeah.
then I was like, I got goosebumps after
Yeah.
watching the movie. I'm just hearing this weeks later and I got goosebumps and I was,
Yeah.
just looking in the corner of my room for, like the next few weeks just freaking out. But I thought that was pretty awesome. But
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, it's strange how just someone mentioning one little thing here or there can just
Yeah.
totally change your perception of
That's
a
it. And
book or movie.
I think it always is worth going back to rewatch things you maybe didn't enjoy. There's quite a lesser known film called the Mothman Prophecies. I think
Yeah.
Richard Gere was in it. I saw that
Hmm.
at the cinema and I came out thinking, I don't really understand what I've just watched there. It wasn't for me. Watched it again a few years later, and I watch it maybe every couple of years now. I've done DVD. I love it. It's
Yeah.
strange how you change as the years go on, and you like different things, and maybe what you thought sucked doesn't suck, and what you absolutely adored, you rewatch and think, what was I thinking there?
Yeah, that's strange
Yeah.
you said that, Mothman Prophecies, because it's not necessarily a scary movie. It's
No,
just
not at all.
very kind of eerie
Yeah.
and it is dread filled. And I
Yes.
like you. I mean, I think I watched that about a year and a half ago. And a few years before that, it's like every 5 years or so, I get an itch to watch that movie, and I don't really
Yeah.
understand why.
Yeah.
Kind of have to see it.
It has something about it. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a scary film by any stretch, like, exactly like you say, but it has something about it, some sort of
Hmm.
ethereal quality, and yeah, it is really, really good. Certainly works for me.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me into my next question, which is really, like I said, like a building. We talked a little bit about it before, building of this dread that you do
Mhm.
really well, and
Thank you.
specifically in the Haunted series.
Mhm.
So I've read the first one, and like I'm not going to try to give anything away. I think your readers will probably have all read this
Mhm.
for now, but we're gonna
I think
we're
so.
gonna try to not give spoilers because there might
Yeah.
be future Lee Mountford fans that come to this and go like, don't give it to me. But yeah, it's one of those that it is, you put out some of these cookie crumbs throughout this
Yes.
book,
Yeah.
and which is awesome. And then the payoff comes, of course, as
Yeah.
it always happens in books and movies in the end.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of in awe of how you and other authors like Darcy Coates
Yes.
comes
Yeah.
out and, takes this and the dread just starts slowly building. Because in my books, I'm
Yeah.
very fast paced. It's
Yeah.
it's a page turner, it's like, oh my God, I gotta keep reading.
Yeah.
Your guys, you just slowly build this stuff. And
Yeah.
inside of us, the reader, we're like, it's coming. I know it's coming. I don't know when it's coming, but it's coming. So how do
Yeah.
you how do you really create that environment, that atmosphere?
I think that is deliberate. Certainly with a ghost story, I'd like mine to be exactly like you say, a slow burn. So to start off with, just planting those little seeds, exactly like you say. My other books that are more fast paced page reads, I don't go down that road. I don't employ that technique. It is exactly like you say, full on from the first few pages. But with a ghost story, I do think that sort of story lends itself to the slow build, the slow build of dread, and the little glimpse. When if you're watching a film that works in a similar way, you'll get little glimpses of something, but it doesn't push too far early on. And I just do think it helps invest the reader. You'll have a little glimpse. Or did I just see something in the corner of the room there, or was that just my imagination? And we've all experienced that in real life.
Yeah.
You do a double take, and it was just my reflection. Or you can understand the fear that you can instill in yourself by just doubting yourself. And did I really see something? And it's relatable. So I think by slowly building that, I think if a ghost story was to come out of the blocks too strong in the early stages, where'd you go from there? Because it relies less on the thriller aspect of a fast-paced story and more on the dread. So if the dread hits early on, I think it's hard to maintain that all the way through a story. It needs to be a bit like a, a roller coaster, and steadily building for the payoff. So that's something is deliberate, and I try to, like, when I outline the story piece in, this will be a smaller scale. We'll come along here. This feels like it needs something a little bit bigger, but still not too much. And just sort of steadily build it that way. And I do like to, before I go into a story, have an idea of just little things that I can put in. Like in the demonic, there was one of the characters is on crutches, and he walks and there's always a click, 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 click sound. And I wanted that to pay off later in the story. A funny story about that is I had that idea to have it pay off, sent it to the editor, and he came back and he said, "You've missed your payoff here." I'd completely forgot to write the payoff. So I'm glad you checked that. We'll add that in. But again, without giving too much away, in the Haunted, the one that I had in my mind was the child, a young child, doesn't really say a lot, but it can say the word man. If it sees a strange man, it'll point and say man. And I thought, well, that would be great if suddenly, there's a guy comes to fix the heating system, man, and we know who that is. But then if the mother's in the room alone with the child and suddenly man, and nobody else is in the house, that's a freaky image. So it's things like that I try and, set up going in and play with.
So I know you've already put out 4 books in the Haunted series, and I've kind of not read ahead, but a little read into about what happens in these. So I know it's you sort of have like a trilogy going into it, and then it kind of catapults into the 4th book, Possession, and you're now working on 5 and 6. And from what I remember reading was that you're going to try to put these guys out in October or November. Is that still sort of
still a plan? Yeah, it's in the
Okay.
pipeline. They're booked in with the editor in September, so I'm racing through them as fast as I can. I was actually doing some words earlier today, so the plan is to get them out there. I think realistically it's probably going to be November. I would have liked a sort of October Halloween type line, one earlier in the month and one a little bit later, but I think it may have slipped to November now, thinking about it. But that is certainly the plan. I know where the stories are going, well on my way with them. So, but yeah, it's certainly still the case.
Okay. And since we'd be up to 6, how long do you think this series might go?
I think there's at least 9 in my head, certainly. Cool. And one of the reason I sort of expanded the story, which you find out more about in books 2, 3, and so forth. The first 3 books deal with the same house, the history of that house and what happens, but then you find out more about what the house is, its wider connections to the world. And the reason I sort of planted that and wanted that to develop, and then I could open the story up beyond the house into other locations, is that I did want to write a series, but with horror, it's hard, to write a series that's, a lot of people die in horror. It's difficult to keep things going. And in haunted houses, it's kind of like, well, you're finished with the house now. How can those characters realistically go to another house? So I created what I thought was a strong mechanism for that to happen. And it has wide implications on the story and on what these locations are. And I came up with the idea and I thought, I think that'll work. So that's why I'm running with the series. I think once I hit the 6 books, I'll work on some other things for a little bit and then go back and do books 7, 8, and 9 from there, and then see when I'm coming up with the ideas for those, I'll know, are we finishing at book 9 or does it go a little bit longer? I don't want to kill it. I don't want to overdo it. But there's certainly a lot of ideas there. That's the other thing. So it's finding that balance, certainly.
Yeah. It's something that you hit on earlier, saying that you can't really how do you make a series for horror, because really at the end, like you said, there is death. One way or another, for the most part, there's usually death. And that's something that I've butted up with in my endeavors. And I had to basically put them into like trilogies or quartets or something like that. So for instance, I have a trilogy of supernatural thrillers, which leads into another, actually a quartet of horror novels with a lot of those same characters.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I'm carrying over some of the few into the next one. And now I'm actually going back because I'm like, how do I finish that last series? And it's like it all goes back to the beginning, which nobody knows. So now I'm writing that. And one of the interesting things with that is you really influenced me with your Haunted series for this new prequel that I'm writing. And it was primarily my main character Eloise, who's in all of my books, who will be in all of these books, like 15 books, except for one.
Yeah.
And it's like, we know her parents are, a drag, basically. We'll
Yeah.
put it that way. But they're kind of not nice people, and we really
Mhm.
don't know why. And I decided to go back and actually write this book. So the first book of my prequel series is sort of like your first haunted book.
Yeah.
And the second one goes back in the past, just like
Yes.
yours does,
Fantastic. Yeah.
before we go into the third one in the final of the series. And I thought, Lee did a fantastic job with this. I think I'm just going to copy him.
Yeah. Well, a lot of my work is copy as well. Yeah. It's you know, inspiration doesn't come in isolation. You draw it from everywhere. The Conjuring heavily influences lot of my works and things like that. So, and I've copied ideas. People say copy. You shouldn't copy. Borrowed then for whatever whatever term works best. I don't think there's any shame in that. Certainly, I do it all the time. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think
it's no, what I was going to
I
say is
yeah,
I haven't read the second book. I have no
yeah,
idea what's in your second book.
yeah,
Mine is the way I write is totally different than you, and you write
yeah.
from, the next guy. So
Mhm.
I think what I read recently is everybody copies. It's more like, all right, well, what are you going to do with that? How are you going to make
Yeah,
it your own? And that's
absolutely.
really the clincher, because I think, all new plots stopped around the 1800s or something like that.
Yeah,
I read once.
exactly. Yeah,
So it's just like, how am I going to mix all this stuff into something
yeah.
new and make it exciting?
And that's it. And readers still want your books just because a lot of the main, exactly like you say, the main thrust of plots were finished in the 1800s. Do we just stop? People still want these new stories, and
Yeah.
I think there's always interesting ways that you can play with existing things. And in the Haunted series, there's actually a prequel book
Right,
that
right,
people can get for free, and it's written as if it's a real. One of the characters in the story is a paranormal investigator, and he wrote a book about the house, Perrin Manor. He wrote this book, and it's mentioned in the first in Haunted Perrin Manor. He mentions his book that he wrote about the place. That book is actually written. I've wrote, it's there for people to go back and read as if it, really exists, and it gives the backstory of the house in more detail. So
right.
everything you couldn't cram into a story, it's done. And I think it's just about coming up with little ways like that to, give the readers something different and give them what they know and what they want, but just put a different spin on it in different ways. That is a big challenge, I think, of what we do, and that is one of the key aspects, I think.
Great. So, just since I mentioned that, this book of mine will be coming out. I'm thinking about right now, actually.
Wow.
When this airs, it'll be out. It'll be brand new. So I'm going to just show you guys a cover of it.
Fantastic.
Here it is. It's called In the Shadows,
Very nice.
and it looks very gothic. It's actually
Yes.
not too gothic, but I just loved this cover so much that I
Yeah.
really had to just go out and say, yes, that's mine. That's
Yeah,
like the perfect
absolutely.
beginning.
Yeah.
But before I get going, I just wanted to ask you and give you an opportunity to say if there's anything out there that you wish your readers would know about you.
Mhm.
Now you have the floor.
Oh,
Is there
thank you.
anything out there?
Um, I think one of the main things is if people go onto my website or Facebook pages, there's an offer there where people, if they sign up to the newsletter, they get 2 free books. And if you bear with me 2 seconds,
Sure, take your
they
time.
are these two. In ebook format, obviously, but you get the Nightmare Collection, which is a short story collection, and it's got a prequel to the Demonic in there. And then the book that I mentioned that was the prequel to Perrin Manor, which is deals with the history of the house. You get those for absolutely free if you sign up to the mailing list. And if people don't want to stay on a mailing list, just unsubscribe. But you do get the free ebooks there if you do that. So it might be just of interest to people who want to just check out the write and see if it's for them before actually buying a book.
Sounds
I
great.
think
Thank
that
you,
was the
Lee.
main thing.
Lee, thanks so much for being on the show.
I
Like I
appreciate it.
said, you've been an inspiration for me. I hope this podcast finds your readers well, that they may have learned some things about you that they hadn't known. And just so all of the readers and writers out there who might be watching,
Yeah.
I try to do this podcast every couple weeks. One of the
Mhm.
reasons I take so long, I prefer to do it weekly, but
Mhm.
in trying to look at a lot of the horror writers out there. So if you
Mhm.
are a horror writer and you'd like to be on the show, let me know. You can get in touch with me at kirkkilgrave@gmail.com. Simply because I try to find you guys, and a lot of you don't have websites or you don't really have contact information on your Facebook. So keep that in mind. Get in touch with me. And our next edition of the podcast here at the Kilgrave Corner is going to be with the 4-time Bram Stoker nominee, Jeff Strand. So
Wow.
he's fantastic. I'm looking forward to speaking
Yeah.
with him too. So again, Lee, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it. You're the first author I contacted for the show, and I was really
Thank you.
glad that you were open to it.
No, I appreciate you having me on. It's been really fun. I'm sure you'll have a great time with Jeff Strand. He's a fantastic author. I love his work, so that'll be brilliant.
Sounds great. Thank you, Lee. Take care.
So, okay, thank you very much. Take care. Cheers.
Bye
Bye.
bye.